So you start with a belief that is fantastical, and yes, QAnon, get people roused and they start breaking into pizza parlors with assault weapons. People start to do atrocious and terrible things, and it's a way of bringing hate around.
A critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in this subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cults, Culture, and Coercion. And I've been looking forward to this interview with a dear friend, colleague, Jon Atack, who lives in Nottingham, England, who is the world's authority on Scientology. I've done numerous interviews with Jon over the years, co-authored chapters in peer-reviewed journal textbooks. Jon is a former Scientologist, 9 years, a public Scientologist. So he didn't get to do the billion-year Sea Org contract or the staff or the RPF. We'll get into that too.
Still time.
But I need to just get into, Jon is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant, educated people I've had the pleasure to befriend. He is an author of Let's Sell Him a Piece of Blue Sky, the best book on Hubbard, Opening Our Minds. He's done novels, he's done translations. He is a drummer, he's a painter, he's a poet. And I'll probably remember a few more things. But we're here to talk about his latest book called, and we get a double screen, If Scientology Ruled the World, Nazi Occultists, Sex Magic, Space Aliens, and the Second Coming. And we have it as a paperback. I listened to Jon read it. I like to listen to authors read their own work because it brings an extra level of intensity for me other than just reading. And I texted Jon, I said, this book is a masterpiece. Wow. This really has done a thought experiment. What would happen if Scientology took over the world, which it won't, but we have other dictators who want to take over the world, and therefore it is incredibly relevant. And before we get into conversation with the author of this very important book, I just want to say the Young Republicans text thread got hacked with lots of comments about Nazis. Ever since Trump has ascended to the White House in 2016, he has encouraged Nazism and white supremacy and extremists. People don't understand the Nazis were into occultism, and Jon does a brilliant scholarly job connecting the dots with the Blavatsky, their beliefs, the eugenics stuff, the Aryan myth. We're going to get into all of these things. Plus, he threw in that the theory that makes a lot of sense to me that Hubbard had temporal lobe epilepsy, as other famous cult leaders seem to display the same stereotypical profiles. He covers so many important points. And at the end, for good measure, he talks about other mainstream cults, including the Moonies. So with that, I want to ask Jon, I know that you're tired. You've been doing this work for a really long time.
1 billion years.
People have yet to recognize your importance into the field of cult education. You have a YouTube channel, Jon Atack and Friends. I really want people to know you, and I want them to buy this book or listen to this book. So let's start with, why'd you write another book about Scientology? Let's start there, because you know about so many other things.
Well, it seemed time to come back to it. I wrote Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, which is a quotation from Ron Hubbard.
Right.
You know, it was published 35 years ago. It's still, sadly, the only comprehensive history of Scientology. And Scientology is the most fascinating story of the 20th century. L. Ron Hubbard is the most colourful con artist of the 20th century. That he has no competitors. That it's an amazing story. It's just an incredible story. And after I left Scientology, which is 42 years ago now, as a customer, public as they call it, having risen to the great heights of superpowers of the fifth of their super levels,
Right.
And as with anybody else, there was no benefit to that. I have no superpowers, darn. But then nor does anybody else. So evidently, if they did have any superpowers, we wouldn't be talking now.
That's part of the con, though, right? Is that you can control matter, energy, space, and time.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
And at the very top of this, there's this level that they call Operating Thetan Section 8. And Operating Thetan is a Thetanal being who can leave their physical body at will, travel anywhere they want to in the universe, and it's a very big universe out there, by the way, and make things explode or, bring things into being. Magical, godlike powers. And that's what Hubbard was promising from 1952 onwards, when he first gave us his version of the word Scientology. And It's none of it true. And it's incredibly embarrassing that as a young man, I believe this nonsense. But finally, they released this level that's meant to actually do it, Operating Thetan Section 8. And you're meant to be at cause over matter, energy, space, and time, not simply mentally, but physically. So you are a super god by this point. And they released the course in 1988. Ron Hubbard had very carefully died in the meanwhile so that he wouldn't get into trouble over it. He died in 1986. They released this level, and I think by the time you've got to it, you've spent more than $500,000. So if you haven't got that much money, don't do it. That's what I'd recommend. This is great for billionaires, by the way, this course. It's really good for them, and they should all do it.
And they go after wealthy, famous influencers, not to drop names. Tom Cruise is one of the biggest proselytizers for this awful cult.
Yeah, lots of Hollywood stars who don't necessarily live exemplary lives, who haven't demonstrated an ability to live forever, or any superpowers. In fact, quite a lot of their celebrities along the way have died. Nicky Hopkins, the brilliant pianist, for example, died in his 50s while doing Scientology. Isaac Hayes was involved with the just legendary people, both of them.
Right.
He got deeply involved and didn't live to a ripe old age either. So it didn't work, and it doesn't work. But on this level, when it was first released in 1988, aboard their cruise liner, the Freewinds, which is, they have their slaves, an organization called the Sea.
It is a trafficking cult, in my professional opinion.
Yeah, it's very definitely a trafficking cult. There are slaves. There are teenage slaves. So there are people who are moved from country to country and are treated in an appalling way. That they are slaves, and there are about 4,000 of them. And I think the main emphasis with Scientology should be on stopping enabling them to keep doing this to people, protesting about this, making sure that people know. And as you say, they've got billionaires. The Duggans, Bob and Trish Duggan, claim to have given $340 million to Scientology. And Trish Duggan is on the board at the Kennedy Center along with President Trump. So
a cult that is in the cult of Trump. And I should have added Scientology and the Moonies and Falun Gong and a few other Mormons and a few other cults. But anyway, back to your story.
Yeah, I mean, Grant Cardone is an associate also of Donald Trump. So when this thing was released, there was this bulletin at the beginning of it, written by Hubbard, that they had to take off within a week. Now, I've verified this. 2 people who did the course verified it, and 2 people who were involved with releasing the course verified it's true. And what this thing says is that the entire purpose of Scientology is to stop the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's what it's for. That's what it's always been for. And he said he had an inkling of this in 1945, before he started his Dianetics thing in 1950. And this is exactly the point where he met sex magician Jack Parsons, 1945. They performed ceremonies which were recorded and which I've talked about extensively over the last 40 years, called the Babylon working, which are an attempt to incarnate the Antichrist, in the simplest terms. So Hubbard was trying to do this, and he's saying, yeah, that's what I was always trying to do. That's what Scientology is about. I just haven't told you that before. And I'm only telling those of you who've paid $500,000 about this. And this is the real intention. And he says quite directly that he is with Lucifer, which, in biblical terms, if you go to both the New and the Old Testament, it is explained that Lucifer is Satan. It's that simple. Samael, Satan, Iblis. There are lots of words for him. So he's with Satan and he's with the Antichrist. This is absolutely stated in this thing. So it was sort of, well, okay, how's this going to happen? And his explanation is that there are a group of people from another star system called the Markab. And the Markabians, apparently, according to Hubbard, and there's very little in his published work about Markabians. I only found 4 statements from the late 50s and early 60s, and they don't seem to be too bad. But apparently, they are Jesus's cohorts, and they're going to come with him and take the planet over, and we've got to stop them. And according to Hubbard, they have colonies on Venus, which has a median temperature of 400 degrees centigrade, which would be a little bit higher in Fahrenheit. So it's a hot place. So they have colonies there, and they have colonies on Mars, which has a median temperature of minus 40 degrees. And I wish Elon Musk would go there soon. And they decided that they'd put their prisoners on Earth so that we have to suffer the temperatures on Earth rather than... It's absolutely mad crazy. Hubbard even, he talks about the 4th and 5th invader forces on these planets. And on Venus, he reckons there are train lines. I mean, we've all heard about the canals on Mars, but come on, guys. Train lines on a planet that's at 4 times the boiling point of water. These are going to be some train lines. I suppose that is below the melting point of steel, so it's not impossible. So what he's saying is that these Markabians are going to come along and we've got to stop them. And that's all Scientology is about. It's not about any benefit to humanity. This man died with $648 million in his personal accounts, all taken from Scientology for the benefit of humanity. And thousands of slaves.
If I may add, John, the public gets lied to, and people are told you can be a Catholic and a Scientologist, you can be a Jew and a Scientologist, etc. And it ain't so.
It's eclectic.
So please continue.
Yeah, I mean, so I pull out some of the things that he said. So, for example, I mean, there are lots of confidential, secret things where he says Jesus is an invention, an implant from 75 million years ago that was suddenly triggered and came into being. But there's even a publicly available bulletin called the Heaven Bulletin from 1963, where Hubbard says, I have been to heaven. And he gives an exact date down to the second, how many millions of years ago he was last in heaven. And he says, and you've all been there too. And it's basically what we'd call a Potemkin village. It's this cardboard construction, this kind of cowboy set, this Hollywood set, where people are given implants to forget everything and shoved into their next body. So he there denies heaven. He denies there's a place where he says the creator of the universe will be found under a rock, which is his view of Yahweh, Jehovah. And Christianity is just completely a made-up fairy story. And then, as you say, he says it's eclectic. You can be. There's even a thing called a letter to a Catholic priest explaining how you can be a Catholic and Scientologist.
Well, I just want to add that they did not have tax exemption status in the U.S. for 25 years, and through a series of fraud revealed by former top Scientologists who tricked the IRS. They sued IRS commissioners and harassed them to get tax exemption. And now they're a religion, so hands off
Yeah.
they're fine, but they're not fine. They're an authoritarian, totalitarian, mind control cult that traffics people. So back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they brought 3,000 lawsuits against the IRS and IRS employees. They are, or they were, they seem to have stopped since they lost their massive suit against Time magazine in 2011. They were, there is no doubt, the most litigious organization that has ever existed. They dropped
So
3,000 suits in one day.
And I need to add that Time magazine in 1991 did a cover story, Scientology, the Cult of Greed, with a picture of the volcano, which is part of the Hubbard lore, that these aliens were dropped into a volcano and a hydrogen bomb, was it, that exploded, and all these beings are on our bodies, and that's why we need to pay for Scientology to excommunicate these aliens?
They're not aliens. They're us. They're beings. They're spirits. They're thetans or thetans, if you prefer his pronunciation. And the idea was that they were harvested 75 million years ago by the evil Prince Xenu, galactic overlord Xenu, and brought to this planet. And this is a population of nearly 180 planets. Were actually the beings, the thetans, with spirits, were dropped into volcanoes on Hawaii and the Canary Islands, neither of which existed 75 million years ago. They're both actually 9 million years old, but let's not get into too much science here.
Yes.
And then collected on electronic ribbons and then clustered together while being implanted with hypnotic suggestions for 36 days. Those hypnotic suggestions included the Christian religion, according to Hubbard. So you've got this fairly wacky sort of nonsense going on in the background. But I looked at this bulletin and I said, well, okay, if they take the world over, then they're going to get rid of the Malkavians, aren't they? Because the Malkavians are evil. And anybody who says, I don't think Hubbard was a very handsome man, or I think David Miscavige is not as tall as he ought to be.
That's who took over after Hubbard died. David Miscavige is the leader of this group now.
And he's been in control of Scientology for longer than Hubbard was. Hubbard had 36 years. He's been there since 1987.
Interesting.
As Tony Ortega has pointed out. So along the way, you get this fantastical story. And it's like, well, okay, if you oppose Scientology in any way, you are a Malkavian. No doubt. And so that, there have been, I've known about Nazi occultism for 40 years. And most of the material that's written about it is nonsense. The Morning of Magicians, The Spear of Destiny. These books are not worth reading. But there are now historians like Nicholas Goodrick Clark and Eric Kurlander, professors, who've looked into that part of the Nazi party, headed largely by Heinrich Himmler, who were into all sorts of fantastical and bizarre ideas. Himmler was breeding people to have superpowers. So very much like Scientology, you're going to have superpowers, but they were being bred. So what he was doing was he had these Lebensborn, freely born centers, particularly in Norway, where there were more than 8,000, perhaps 20,000 children were born with the idea of eugenic breeding leading to them having superpowers. So they would have blonde, blue-eyed women who would be coupled with SS officers, and those children, the most famous of them is Frida in ABBA, the group ABBA. She's a Lebensborn child. I'm very sad to say they were horribly treated by the Norwegians after the war as well, and have won a case against the Norwegian government for that. But so there's this idea of eugenic breeding. There's the idea of the Aryan race. And what I did was I just kept going backwards to go, well, who came up with the Aryan race fantasy? And if you ask neo-Nazis today, where does this idea come from? They go, Hitler. It's like, and why do you come to this conclusion? In researching it, there's an actual entry point. 1882 is when this idea first comes about. It's a really modern idea. There's nothing historically behind it. It's grabbed hold, and that was a US congressman called Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, who served 4 terms. And his book, Atlantis, the Lost Continent, or the Lost Continent Atlantis, is then picked up by this amazing woman, Helena Blavatsky, who
is the root of so many mind control cults of today.
I think all of the Hinduism, Buddhism came into the West because of her. She is, there are other people who are bringing the intellectual properties of this, definitely, but she's the one that made it popular. And she's fascinating because where Hubbard is a charlatan. He's probably a crank, but he's a charlatan. He knows he's conning people. You can see it. If you look carefully at what he had to say. He wrote private letters, which people gave to me along the way. So I have, the 10th of April 1953, he writes to his deputy, Helen O'Brien, who gave me her letters. What do you think of the religion angle? And talks about how much more money they could make if they were a religion. In 1949, he wrote to his literary agent, Forry Ackerman, who shared the correspondence, all of his correspondence with me. And he says, I've come across this technique that's got more selling angles than anything I've come across. You can rape women and they'll have no memory of it. And then he's like, and I might take over the Catholic Church. I'm not sure yet. And at the bottom of the letter, he says, this letter is confidential. So his real intention.
I need to add, just because you just said it, but I want to just, for my listeners who know that I've studied hypnosis for a really long time. Yep. Hubbard was a hypnotist. So when he's telling people you can rape women and give them amnesia from being raped, this is a thing. This is doable. People are in jail where we've recorded, people have recorded them raping, but people don't remember. And that's part of the power of capturing people's minds and their imaginations. Back to you.
You can create hypnotic amnesia. And, with the whole of Scientology, the auditing, as he calls it, which doesn't mean looking at your accounts as it does to everybody else. People say, it's a type of counseling. It's not a type of counseling.
Right.
It's a set of hypnotic inductions to make you believe fantasies and get you to feel high, what in Scientology is called having very good indicators. And that's the end of your session. You go, oh, wow, I feel fantastic. Now that euphoria, very well as a hypnotherapist, that you can induce euphoria in people. And it's one of the first effects of hypnotic trance, that people feel great. The colors in the room are brighter.
But he doesn't call it hypnosis. That's the key. He says we're going to de-hypnotize you. But in the meantime, let's do the training routines. Close your eyes, put your feet flat on the floor and your hands in your lap, and just be there until the Scientologist says you pass. And then learn how to have that state staring into the eyes of a Scientologist. Right. So it's a training program for deep trance identification into a pseudo identity, which is Scientology, being a good Scientologist.
Yeah. And as I'm told, Immanuel Kant said, because I'm never going to be bright enough to read Immanuel Kant, but I'm told that he said, we don't live in the real world. We live in our construction, our interpretation of the world. And that's true. Like it or not, we're always interpreting what the meaning of the world is, and part of the function of our mind is to predict. Part is also to remember.
Exactly.
That's important as well, and part is to analyze and evaluate things. But that you can change, as our friend Christian Schurko says, you can take over the internal reality control, the locus of control in a person, and they will then start. If you've taught them, as say Paul Twitchell at Eckankar, who was a massive devotee of Hubbard, he wrote things for Hubbard, and then went off and said there are a load of fairies everywhere. And if you can persuade people that fairies are making things happen to them, then that's how they'll interpret reality.
Or guardian angels is the latest trend.
We're back to guardian angels. I mean, around it.
Yeah, ascended masters are all your.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the heart of Nazis, and you were talking about eugenics programs, and I know that you've researched, because I read your book, there is no such thing as an Aryan race. Like, the whole idea is preposterous.
Yeah.
Please share a little bit
Well,
more.
this is interesting. I mean, firstly, why aren't historians saying this is where the Aryan race idea comes from? This is pretty important. But secondly, why aren't they saying that the Nazis disproved the Aryan race? There is no doubt they did 12 years that the amount of Himmler nearly bankrupted the Third Reich, sending expeditions all over the world, setting up archaeological digs. You know, they went in several expeditions to Scandinavia, to another to Tibet, one to trace the Cathars in the Languedoc in the south of France. But they poured money into this and ran institutions to try and prove that they were a distinct and separate race, a species apart from the rest of humanity. So there were Mediterraneanoids, not a word you hear very often.
Ever.
There were Semites, which includes the Arabs as well as the Jews, though when they were going and trying to persuade the Arabs to hurt the Jews, they didn't say that. They admitted along the way that the Japanese were Aryan, which is kind of weird. But when it came down to it, they did measurements on hundreds of thousands of people, you know, cranial measurements of every part of the skull, measurements of calf muscles, blood types, fingerprints, ear measurements, one small study. And they came to the conclusion that they could not tell, that they absolutely could not tell whether somebody was, and Hitler, and this is something that I found it in one academic's book, where he quotes Hitler from the bunker saying, yeah, I know they're not a race. I know the Jews are not a race. And you go, well, what was this about, really? If you were intelligent enough to understand that this was just a way of rousing hate against other people, you know, how deplorable. But they disproved Aryan race theory. Since then, of course, I read 3 books on genetics to get my head around it and on eugenic theory. Since then, genetics has absolutely proved that we come from the same ancestors. Curiously, in China, in modern China, academic institutions do not teach this. They teach that the golden race is separate from the rest of us, so they've got their own kind of Aryan race theory going on. But
that's relevant because they want to take over the world.
I think
Xi and the Chinese communists.
Yeah, I don't know about I think they want to take the world over economically. I think militarily that people are trying to scare us, and the Chinese would like revenge for the century of humiliation, and Westerners should be aware of what was done in China, the Opium Wars and the destruction of the Chinese system by greedy billionaires. Oh, here we are again. We should, in the same way that we should be aware of the Middle East and the awful things that were done by Britain, France, and America after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1918, which explain why it's like in North Korea, there are people who don't like Americans. And you go, how could they not? Americans are lovely people. And you go, by the end of the Korean War, there was not one town standing. They were bombed flat. And for some reason, they resent that and have found themselves, in probably the worst and most oppressive cult in the world, North Korea under the Kims.
North Korea is a mind control cult for sure. Yeah. So I don't know, John, but you've heard me speak about my fears of authoritarians, elitists, oligarchs, broligarchs wanting to take over the world, get rid of human rights, get rid of government regulation, to protect the rest of us. And I want you to get back to, why this book is so important, even if you're not into an ex-Scientologist or you're not, critical of the Nazis. Why should people read this book, and what to take away from it that will help us?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you and I have co-authored academic chapters, and one of them, the Oxford University Press, is Lone Act of Terrorism, where we showed how people are now being recruited on the internet without having to join any physical group. And this has become an astonishingly dangerous situation. My whole, again, we were together at the founding of the Open Minds Foundation 10 years ago. We were the two people it began with, and we're neither of us with it anymore. But the idea there was to say, how is it that people's reasoning is being bypassed and that they are being subjected to authoritarianism? My point of view is we are living, when I first wrote Opening Minds, as it was called, Opening Our Minds as it now is, I talked about totalism or totalitarianism, a word that was invented to describe Mussolini, total authoritarianism. Then in the later editions, I went, no, my problem is not simply with totalitarianism. My problem was with authoritarianism. And I came to realize that it isn't a matter of us returning to a place where there isn't authoritarianism. Our systems are authoritarian. Our educational system is authoritarian. It tells children what to do. It doesn't use intelligent disobedience, as our friend Ori Chalev puts it. It doesn't educate people to be good citizens in a democratic society. It's an obedience training, so that you'll go, oh yeah, free market capitalism's fine. It doesn't matter if some individual has got $600 billion. I mean, I'm with Bernie Sanders on this point. $1 billion is enough. And I quote, that there should not be a tiny group of people, as there always have been. We aren't kind of recovering democracy. We're still trying to generate it. We're still trying to create a situation where the corporations and the lobbyists don't control the politicians. Again, as Bernie Sanders said, the Democrat Party, because it relies for its funding on these people, is stuck. They can't create the necessary change in society because the pharmaceutical companies and the corporations, we need a massive sea change to understand authoritarianism. Now, this is a book about how authoritarianism progressed from a set of stupid fairy tales into the murder of 50 million people. Himmler, there's a point where he gave an order in 1941 to the SS, and he had 1.25 million troops. He was the head of those troops. He was the second most powerful man in the Third Reich. And the order that he gave, which I think every school child should know, is that 30 million people were to be killed as the army moved through to Moscow. And the horrible truth is they came very close to that. We know there were at least 20 million. There were probably as many as 27 million people deliberately murdered. So you start with a belief that is fantastical, and yes, QAnon. You start with a belief that's fantastical, get people roused, and they start, breaking into pizza parlors with assault weapons. People start to do atrocious and terrible things. And it's a way of bringing hate around. So hopefully this book, by showing how the Nazi idea developed, how stupid the idea of eugenics is, and what would happen not simply if Scientology or one of its probably by now 300 or 400 derivative cults, if any of these authoritarian cults took over, they would set about getting rid of their enemies, whether it was through labor camps or death camps. And they would feel entitled to do that because they would say, you're not human. In the same way that the Nazis said, the Slavs were an inferior or slave people and the Jews were vermin. And in every genocide, we have that dehumanizing factor.
And you've heard me say, John, and some of my listeners, I was in the room with Sun Myung Moon in 1974 when he said, we're going to infiltrate the government. God doesn't like democracy. It's satanic. He wants a theocracy. And when we take power in America, we'll amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense if people have sex outside of their unification, mass wedding, arranged marriages. We'll be helping people by taking their physical bodies away from them. And as a brainwashed Mooney leader, I thought it was a great idea because we want the Garden of Eden on earth. I was blindly following a madman. But that's what's happening now with Trump. They literally are creating a myth that this is a Christian nation. It isn't. That the founders of the United States wanted a theocracy, a white Christian nationalists and supremacists, and they're going after blacks and Hispanics and women, and then they'll go after gays and everybody else that doesn't just toe the line. And just one more point, I'll just say that an Ontario right-wing politician paid for an ad of Ronald Reagan talking about why tariffs are bad for America, and played it on Fox TV during the World Series. And Trump got so angry, he said, "That's it. I'm breaking off, trade talks with Canada, or we're going to impose a bigger tariff." So what is Trump doing? He's sending a message of censorship. Say anything, even replaying from a Republican president what he said. If he doesn't like it, you're in trouble. We're coming after you. And this is really dangerous.
It is, and it's happening all over the world. The heroes that Donald Trump has talked about, Putin, for example, Xi,
exactly,
Viktor Orban in Hungary, that these are the people he admires. And it isn't a matter of left and right. Again, people get so caught up in words and they think there's some meaning. I would love to hear what left and right mean, according to, because, you have authoritarianism of communism, which is the left, or fascism, which is the right. And the thing is to overcome authoritarianism, to not slavishly follow people because you like the look of them or you like the sound of them, but to look at evidence and be able to consider evidence without being overwhelmed by cognitive dissonance, all of that confusion. I mean, I personally love it, when my thoughts are challenged, when somebody brings me new evidence, because I think it is childish not to. I think to be an adult, you should welcome correction as long as it is done in an agreeable way. And unfortunately, we don't. And so people form camps and they other people. I mean, I've often talked about, watching two people with megaphones a yard apart from each other, screaming obscenities at each other at some sort of rally in the United States, 6 or 7 years ago. And it's sort of, how can this lead to any solution? We have to be able to debate. And if we find ourselves becoming, emotionally boiling over, then we need to retreat and we need to think hard about what we're doing.
Exactly. And I want to come back to the internet is using our personalized data, and algorithms are being used to nudge people to more extreme positions on the progressive left side or the right side. But the idea is emotional, stimulation to the point where people can't think intelligently and there's a deliberate attempt to undermine experts and science and the importance of government regulation for the protection of our planet, our well-being. As we're recording this, a Category 5 superstorm, Melissa, is going to be hitting Jamaica, and 175 mile per hour winds. But we're going to see more of this because all of the climate scientists said we have to stop global warming. But all of the oil and fracking entities want for money and greed to keep it going. And it's going to destroy everybody.
It will potentially destroy the human race. Certainly, if we keep on going the way we are going. And I've been watching, I first read about the greenhouse effect in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
As a schoolboy. It's been around since the 50s, and it was laughed at then.
Right.
Yeah, it was laughed at then because it was thought there was going to be another ice age. And everybody knew there was going to be another ice age. Now, we are, the science is good. I was skeptical of the science until the mid-1980s, when ice cores started to be pulled up and misinterpreted by Al Gore in his documentary, but we won't worry about that. There started to be evidence of shifts of climate on Earth. And then when you go, well, of course, if you put a blanket of gas that will keep heat in so it can't be released, that will be dangerous. But this has been too complicated for many people to understand. And so rather than emphasizing we are pouring pollution into our oceans, we are with microplastics, with mercury particularly, we are murdering the seas. And we're, it's just, the governments all around the world. I'm not left or right. I don't like any of them. They're their whole thing is we will borrow against our children. Then it was we will borrow against our grandchildren. When the bankers, the investment hedge fund bankers in 2008 destroyed the economy of the world, none of them paid any penalties. In fact, they kept getting, and there are still no restrictions on what they did. All of the things they did at Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, they can still do. Bear Stearns, they can still do those things, and they are doing. And it's creating a class of, I've got this other word for billionaire, and it's a traditional word, and the word is pirate. These people are pirates. They are not people who've contributed something to society that makes them worthy of massive reward. They are people who have gambled, destroyed currencies, stolen our data. Mark Zuckerberg and the deliberate, he's admitted to being a traitor to the United States, to having lied under oath to Congress, and nobody does anything about it because he's very rich.
Well, they have 1,500 lobbyists or something. They have like 3 lobbyists for every politician or something for Facebook.
Yeah.
And they donate money or they threaten to take away money. So I agree with you on the corruption piece tremendously.
Yeah, and look at all the corporations that are pouring money into this bizarre ballroom that will be bigger than the White House. What's going to happen when Trump realizes that it's dwarfed by the Hermitage in St. Petersburg? He's going to go, we've got to pull down the rest of the White House. Let's have the whole of Washington. Then somebody's going to tell him about
Don't give him any ideas, please, John.
These are ideas he's going to realize because they're facts. Then he's going to realize the Vatican City is bigger than the Hermitage, and he's going to want that. Then he's going to realize that you can put the Vatican City in Angkor Wat 4 times over. So the whole of America is going to be a great big ballroom.
All right. I want to bring this back to your book because I want people to buy it. You don't need to hold it up because I am. Just wet people's whistle on some of the famous cults that have their origins to Scientology that a lot of people don't realize.
Erhard Seminar Training Est, which changed its name to the Forum when that got unpopular, and then became Landmark Trust. That's also influenced Lifespring, Tony Robbins. Any of the large group awareness trainings are derivative. Mm-hmm. When you read about Werner Erhard, even in his official biography, and I mean the book Outrageous Behavior is the book to read about.
By Pressman, yeah.
But reading William Bartley III's official biography, you find out that when Erhard did a few weeks of Scientology, a few weeks of Abilitism, a splinter group, a few weeks of Mind Dynamics, a splinter group, a few weeks of Silver Mind Control, another Scientology splinter group, packaged it all together with no testing, no psychology, and as our friend John Hunter says, manufactured mania. You also, Darfree John, he was a Scientologist. Harvey Jackins, Reevaluation Co-Counseling, he was a Scientologist. There are pictures of him with Hubbard, though he denied it. We tracked 200 groups in the early 90s that came from it, and there are milder and more dangerous versions. You have the metapsychologists out there who are one of the milder versions of Scientology, founded by the psychiatrist Frank Gabodi. Then you have some pretty nasty versions. The overlap, where if you then add Theosophy and probably Christian Science and the whole New Thought movement that it represented, these are the foundation, along with spiritualism, of most of the 20th century cults. Many of those groups actually became Nazi groups, like the Church Universal and Triumphant or William Dudley Pelley.
Mm-hmm.
And
Silver
so
shirts.
you've got the silver shirt movement. You've got these incredible con artists who fundamentally latched onto, and some of them have taken Christian origins and perverted them. And I would say, if you're a Christian and you think Donald Trump's a good idea, or indeed any president, frankly, you should read the Sermon on the Mount and see to what extent you feel he is fulfilling the idea of
Not.
loving your enemy as yourself,
Yeah, the opposite.
rather than being an angry toddler who's going to get his revenge on the world, and that probably means he's going to come around here and beat me up now. That this is just, it's unbelievable. It's the rest of the world is watching what's happening in the US and going, how could you people be so stupid? You are returning to the Middle Ages, to this idea of a luridly powerful small aristocracy who believe themselves entitled to everything, who are ruling over the rest of us and keeping the rest of us in poverty. That wealth could be used for something.
Yep, and I don't know if you want to mention it, but there's a very famous criminal cult that has Scientology roots, but I don't want to spoil anything.
Go ahead.
Well, we've been talking about Manson doing 150 hours of Scientology, and you're working on a book, I believe, on this topic and this fact that nobody's covered, that Manson's roots are really Scientology, not just that he thought he was Jesus. Anyway, I don't want to give away too much. Read this book. And then when his book comes out on Manson, you'll be like, whoa, everybody's missed the boat on Manson, all these famous books and such. I really want you to just talk about temporal lobe epilepsy, because this is a new idea that I've never seen anyone talk about except you with Yuval Laor. So share just a little taste of that, please.
Yeah, it was Yuval who brought it to me when you and I spoke at the Toronto Getting Clear of Scientology conference, and did, I think, a fascinating thing with
and
Chris
the
Shelton
videos exist on Jon's channel.
They're all on my channel, and so we deconstructed Scientology and its hypnotic techniques and approaches. I've also published a paper called Never Believe a Hypnotist, which is also on my channel, which shows, how Hubbard knew exactly what he was doing to people. Sorry, I've lost my thread. There was something about Toronto that
No, I was asking about temporal lobe epilepsy.
Temporal lobe epilepsy, yeah. Sorry.
It's all good.
So at Toronto, Yuval Laor, who's a PhD and an incredible human being, just one of the most brilliant human beings you could ever wish to meet. And he came along and said, have you ever thought about Hubbard having temporal lobe epilepsy? And I went, no. And he put down the 18 characteristics that these two guys, Baer and Fedio, put together for temporal lobe epilepsy. And I ticked 17 of them immediately, 17 out of 18. Now, you only need a majority. Temporal lobe epilepsy doesn't manifest. You don't have grand mal fits. In fact, there may be no sign at all when this person is having a fit. You might know something in the eyes. They might throw an arm up into the air, which Hubbard would do. And they might have a thing with their lips. But you can't necessarily see it. It's the consequence of having a lesion, a bruise or a scar in the temporal lobe, which is at the side here. And it has a set of characteristics. The first is hypergraphia, which is that you'll have to keep writing. Now, Hubbard is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific author of all time. So I think we can tick that one. The second is, if you're not writing, you've got to be talking. He left 3,500 tape lectures, and every word he said from about 1971 onwards was recorded. So they've got this maze of stuff. Rudolf Steiner, similarly, 400 volumes taken from his conversations over a period of a dozen years. So you also have religiosity and an incredible sense of certainty. It will also tie in with a bipolar behavior. And with Hubbard, having interviewed hundreds of people who knew him over the years. He would have these, publicly he's very, happy, and then privately he might lie in bed for 4 days crying, which
So the
the public
highs
were
and
not
the
meant to see.
lows of
Of bipolar. And so you're actually dealing with I have some slight sympathy for him, because you're dealing with somebody who was probably kicked in the head when he was young. With Werner Erhard, by the way, he actually fell from 3 floors up down a stairwell when he was 5 years old and fractured his whole skull. So you have every, and he does fit the characteristics of temporal lobe epilepsy. It may well be that a whole series of our leaders, religious and political, they've just exuded confidence and certainty, not because they know what they're talking about, but because that's how they feel, that they feel certain. And with Hubbard, it'd be every 6 months he'd have a new technique. No, we didn't clear anybody. We didn't make any superhumans because we did this wrong. But now we've got the right technique and we're doing it right. Every 6 months into the 1960s, he kept cancelling everything. Then in the early 60s, he decided to reissue everything he'd ever done.
Right.
So even his first book, Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, he cancelled the technique in there in a book called Science of Survival a year later because it's hypnotic. And then it was re-released in 1977 with, it even says, your eyes will flutter as you go into reverie. So there's a clear admission that these are hypnotic techniques. But he's saying, as you say, no, it dehypnotizes you.
Yeah, it's about words and such. It's so important, your work. You've made so many contributions. I'm personally grateful, but as someone who's been an activist for almost 50 years myself, we have so much more work to do, and we're experiencing a phenomenon, Jon, of people who are born into the Moonies coming out, born into Scientology coming out, and they haven't been properly counseled. People are even activists, ex-members of the Moonies and Scientology, have not done the homework to do the healing. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I think this is a terrible problem. I kept away from the counter cult field and have kept away from it because I found that there were very angry parents who were involved who took a pretty vindictive stand. But there were also former members who were coming out and they wanted revenge. Many people used to come to me asking if they could help me, and I'd ask them what they wanted to do, and they'd tell me how much they wanted to hurt Scientologists, and I'd say, come back when you're feeling better. There is a lot of glee. There is a lot of, this person's, the Schadenfreude, that they want Scientologists to be hurt. I had a friend who was, many years ago, he was in Scientology's C organization in Florida. He was in the Rehabilitation Project Force, who were treated as the lowest of the low. It's based on Maoist brainwashing, the system that's used. So they're not allowed to talk. They clean the toilets, do menial jobs. They don't have beds to sleep on. They eat table scraps. This is pretty awful stuff.
Black
so this is what's happening to him.
Yeah.
And there's a protest, and one of the protesters spat at him. And it's that attitude. It's like, while you are a member, you are scum to be despised, rather than understanding it's the doctrine that's dangerous. It's the teaching
and the procedures of the cult. Yeah.
And you then get ex-members who are saying, no, there's nothing wrong with the Scientology. It's the organization that's wrong. And you're going, no, these beliefs and these hypnotic inductions will lead you into a fantasy world where you'll believe these things are happening and they aren't. You'll think you've got magical powers. And believe me, you haven't. So most recently, I am bothered by a book called Child X by Jamie Mustard, who grew up in Scientology. And he is saying that all former members who were not born into it are devils. He's not talking about doing anything to stop Scientology, to release the 4,000 slaves from Scientology or do anything about Scientology. He is focusing on those of us who were recruited because he thinks we chose to belong, rather than we were manipulated and deceived and hypnotized into belonging. So there's warfare out here. There are camps of Jehovah's Witnesses who are opposed to each other. There are camps of ex-Scientologists who are opposed to each other. Same with all of the groups, and can only think that this is to the advantage of the cult groups themselves. But
and if I can add, John, just, when you're in one of these groups, the mindset is black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them. And when you come out and you haven't understood brainwashing and mind control, and especially if you are born in, unless you understand what a healthy childhood is supposed to look like, what parents are supposed to behave like to make the child feel loved and safe and secure, etc. It's very easy to take that cult mindset as an X and choose enemies. And you're missing the big picture, as you said, which is this is a body of psychosocial, neurological understandings of how the mind can get hacked by bad actors for making power, money, and sex. For those are the three biggies of authoritarian cults.
Absolutely, and often accompanied by sadism and delight in other people's misery. And I've, as you know, for tens of years, have said to people, you're not out of the cult until you've reevaluated the beliefs. So I've again and again advocated that former members form small groups, possibly on Zoom, where they take out some Hubbard text, read a little bit of it, and say, is that true? And if it's true, they can go on with it. But I usually find that the major point in recovery is where somebody is willing to question Hubbard or whoever the cult leader is and say, oh, they're fallible. They got that wrong. And when you find out that fundamental principles in Scientology, the 8 dynamics, the ARC triangle, that these things are nonsensical, but that gives you back control of your mind. The implants, these implanted suggestions, are the beliefs of the group. And you have to get over that. So it's like if you say to an ex-Jehovah's Witness the word Armageddon and they still jump, they've still got work to do.
Good point. Or blood transfusion or something. So I want to just plug your book, Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky. The cult tried to destroy the books even being published. It was appealed all the way to the American Supreme Court. I think they changed one paragraph's wording, but everything you say is documented with footnotes, extensive footnotes. And start with Hubbard. Who is this guy, and what are the facts about his own words? Because cult leaders can be judged by their own teachings.
Yeah, and he was the major informant for my work. I had to read a tremendous amount of his work, but there are 1,100 reference notes in Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. It actually went to the appeal court. The appeal court overturned everything. We had a ruling here over something I'd said about a headmistress interrogating a 12-year-old girl. And that was the only thing, I was forced to remove that paragraph. Which I object to, because why would it be wrong for a Scientologist to be using confessional techniques on a 12-year-old? It's perfectly permissible. It's not libelous to say that she did that. She's now dead, so I can say it again. Otherwise, they were not able. The woman who had done the checking on Ben Corridan's L. Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Madman, and found the faults with that, when she left, she said, I read Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. There isn't a single thing wrong in it.
All these people used your book for their books. Corridan, Reitman, and other people. Lawrence Wright did the documentary Going Clear. But I just want to, as someone who has been trained as a PhD, you are a scholar. You don't have a formal PhD, but in my lifetime, I'm telling you, you deserve a PhD. And people really need to understand you can physically leave a group and it's still operating in your brain, and you really need to do your homework. And my gripe with clinicians is there's no training as a mental health professional on how to work with someone who was born or raised in a cult or recruited into a mind control cult, which is why I'm going to do a plug for my own online course for psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and counselors, because it's a specialized dissociative disorder. And psychoeducation is a key for helping people leave. So we're going to need to wrap up soon, but I want to say again, pick this book up. And I listened to it on audio. Jon reads it. It's so important, and it's documented stuff, very relevant. We don't want any authoritarian mind control cult to rule the world, because the rest of us will be toast. And so, we both, I was going to speak for you for a second, Jon, we both believe former members have a unique role, because we know what it's like to have be duped and mind controlled, and there's life after cult. And there are millions of people believing Donald Trump is doing God's will, and is King Cyrus, and he's the anything but. Just like Hubbard is anything but. But study Scientology, apply it to Trump, and understand this is just another mind control cult.
Yeah, and I mean, in opening our minds, what I tried to show was that all groups use the same techniques that we are seeing in advertising, public relations, spin doctoring, that they are undermining people's reasoning. So it's great to teach people critical thinking, but I learned I'd already got that before I was recruited into Scientology, and it didn't save me. It's our critical emoting. It's that we can be influenced at a deeper level, and it's a shame that there are so many tens of millions of former members who are not doing anything to relieve the problems of the world. There are 40 million slaves, according to the United Nations, in the world at the moment, more than there have ever been
trafficking
before.
Victims, sex and labor trafficking victims, for sure.
13 million in India alone. And we are not facing those problems. And former members of these groups, rather than attacking each other, should be using the skills that they've learned. And that means that you've got to understand what happened to you. But once you've understood that, you can do amazing things in the world. And we are the people who can do that. And the final thing I'd like to say about the book is that what's important is I did a year or two back, I did a little bit culty with Sarah and Nippy Edmondson. And they said my work was academic. And I'd just like to get past that, because I think that's a rather off-putting thing. This should be incredibly mind-bogglingly, jaw-droppingly readable. This is a book that's like, you are kidding me, from one paragraph to the next, because that's how it felt researching it, finding out things that historians should know about the Nazis, some things that have never been said. So it should be fascinating. And if it isn't fascinating, write a review on Amazon and tell me that it wasn't.
It is fascinating. I wrote a review, but what I do want to not pass by is you aren't just making stuff up. You have done the research and are documenting your theses and your claims. You're not just making this stuff up. So in that sense, it's scholarly. And
absolutely. There are 620. Yeah, scholarly I'll go for, academic not. There are 627 reference notes in this book. It is very carefully documented, and several people helped me to make sure it was accurate.
Yeah, and I just want to say, you and I both don't believe that the ends justify the means, and they lie and we should lie, or they're mistreating us so we should mistreat them. We believe in living a just life where we're free of dissonance, where we have a clear conscience and critical thinking, and we love to learn. We're open to changing our minds. Come talk to us. If you really think we're misinformed, don't call us names. Tell us where you think we are not aligned with your beliefs, and let's talk it out. Because in the end, if groups are claiming they're special and they're unique and they're going to change the world in a good way, the burden is on them to prove it, not on us to disprove it. And be open to changing your mind too, that maybe you were duped. Maybe you trusted the wrong person or watched the wrong video on YouTube that was given to you in an algorithm. And here you are, estranged from your family, your friends, and all the values we grew up on that said, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. You know?
I mean, the easiest people to con are the people who know they're invulnerable. They're the easiest.
Who believe that they're invulnerable. Yeah, no,
I'd never join a cult. And it's like, yeah,
that was
really.
my mindset at 19. And then when I got deprogrammed, I was like, how did I ever believe this? Let's go back to the initial meeting. What did I think I was getting involved with? And they just lied and tricked me and manipulated me. And it's that critical processing to unpack.
Yeah,
you know,
what was I offered and what did I get? And, you know, and what do I expect to get? And, you know, when you look at it, it's like Scientology will cure leukemia and cancer. It can raise you from the dead. Hubbard makes these claims publicly. It will raise your IQ to a super level. You'll be emotionally invulnerable. You will never catch a cold again. He promised that in 1950. And it's nonsense. It's wishful thinking.
And for the New Apostolic Reformation cults, they claim they can cast out demons and, you know, heal your cancer and everything else. And when you aren't healed, you die. But it was your fault because you didn't believe properly. It was not their fault.
I did research in 1993 that showed that there was a higher level of death from cancer in Scientology, and there was a higher level of suicide in Scientology.
He was a chain smoker. You said 100 cigarettes a day, and
100 cigarettes a day.
And Mike Rinder died of cancer of the throat, if I'm not mistaken. He was a Scientologist for 46 years at a very high level, I believe.
And on the usual 2 hours sleep a night and the brutal enslavement.
Sleep deprived, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, Steve.
You know, you are such a great human being. We really appreciate you, and we'll be in touch.
Yep.
Thank
See you soon. Yeah.